Hello, my friends. Today we are talking about a timeline of ancient Rome. So here's our objective for that lesson. We can create and analyze a timeline of ancient Rome by ordering the events and answering reflection questions in order to practice using a timeline and see Rome at a glance. So let's begin by reviewing some terms we learned at the very beginning of the year. The first term you should recognize is BC, and the other term is BCE. And both terms refer to the space on on the left side of the timeline. Hopefully you guys can see this. I'm going to highlight it for you. So this is, BCE. And that just means before this marker, which we call 0. And then we have on this side dates going from largest to smallest. So I might have the year 100 here. And then I would have the year 50. Okay. And the next thing that's important to know is these numbers, because they're counting down, you can think of it like a negative number line. However, it's a little different, but basically counting down to 0. Now, someone asked me the other day, Miss Wood, why do we do that? And mostly we do this because it's a good marker. We know of things that happened and hopefully how far apart they are from this space, which is initially created as that space because of people believe Jesus was born that year around that time. And you'll see his birthday on our Rome lesson because he's involved with Rome. So they put this marker here and they're like, oh, well, we know that 50 years before Jesus was born that this happened. And so we have this marker so we can use that to help ourselves. On the other side, we have Anno Domini, which remember that means in the year of our Lord, and CE. So in this lesson, you will see CE used. Let me use a different color. Let's go with blue. So on the CE side, you're going to have dates go from smallest to largest, like positives on a number line. So if 50 was here, we would have 100 down here, right? So you can see if I have an event that happened in BCE, it would go prior to the 0, and if I had an event that happened in CE, it would go after that 0 marker. So let's go now and look at the rest of the rules when it comes to timelines. The first rule is that 0 doesn't count as a year. Things didn't happen in 0. So when you look at time differences between BCE and CE, you do not need to add a year for 0. So that's the biggest reason we're reviewing that information. Keep in mind when we talk about BC or BCE, the higher the number is, the earlier that event happened. So if we went back to our timeline before, the year 50 was a lower number, but it happened after the year 100 on the BCE side. Just like 1000 BCE is going to happen before 500 BCE. Now on the CE and AD side, the number that is higher is going to be the later event that happened. So, for example, 2000 CE is going to happen after 1000 CE. And whenever we're talking about modern times, it's just assumed that we're using CE. Like in 2018, CE is just 2018. So for your timeline practice for this lesson, you're going to be organizing these little cards on this timeline. They have color-coded CE and BCE for you. So BCE here is blue and CE is red. You're going to connect these cards to the little line about where it is. So they've marked like the distance of time on the timeline for you. You just need to connect it to the line. So for this event, I might put it here smaller so that I can fit my other events on my timeline as well. And then whenever I'm going to organize the rest of my events and have them done there, whenever I'm done, I'm going to go to the timeline practice check. And when you're entering those events, make sure that you're entering them by the order of the start date, not by the end date. So for example, with these two events here, the start date is right here for this one, just a little dot, and right here for this one. So this event down here should be put in first. It's a bad S. First, and this should be put in second because the start date of this one happens before the start date of this one. So that is all you need to know for that part for now. So let's go and talk about what you're going to be doing once you create the timeline and have your timeline checked for your mastery check. You're going to analyze your timeline that you created. And two things that you're going to need a review on how to do is length of events and also time between events. So whenever we're calculating the length of an event, you want to subtract the beginning date from the end date. So for example, if I wanted to tell you the length of my grandmother's life, she lived in 1944 to 2020, I would do this. So I would have 2020, which is the end of her life, minus the beginning of her life, so 1944, and I would know that she lived for 76 years. So the answer would be 76. Now, let's look at an example from the BCE side. So if I wanted to figure out how long Alexander the Great, or not so great, up to you, ruled, I would do the same thing. So I'm going to pick 223 first minus 336. And that would be negative 13. Now, because there is no such thing as a negative year, we can just kind of take, I don't know, you haven't learned this yet, or you might have actually. You're going to take the absolute value of that number just to say it's been 13 years. So you don't need the negative piece of that. So the answer would be Alexander the Great ruled for 13 years. And I'm not positive on those dates, by the way, so don't quote me on that. Now let's look about time in between events. So we want to look at the end of the one event. So if the event happens for multiple years, like for example, if Alexander the Great is ruling, we'll look at him again in a second. You're going to take the end date and the beginning of the other one, and then subtract the end date from the beginning date. So for example, let's look at my parents and my birthdays. So if I wanted to figure out the time that passed between when my parents were born and when I was born, I would do this. So I would have 1971 minus 1997. So I could see there's 26 years in between when my parents were born and I was born. Now, I didn't have to pick the beginning date or the end date because those events happened in a single year. So I have 20. Now, again, we have that negative number. We have that negative number here, and we do the same thing. So we don't have negative years, so there's 26 years. Let's look at an example with like a large period of time. So if I want to figure out when Emperor Qin ruled versus when Alexander the Great ruled, I then take the start date of Alexander's and the the end date of Emperor Qin's. So I get this equation, 336, because that's the beginning date, right? And then I'm subtracting the end date from the beginning date. And now I don't have to worry about the negative because I'm not going to get a negative on the BCE side. And then I'd have a 126. Now, if you're doing this with BCE and CE numbers, you're going to do the same thing, wherever the date ends and wherever the date starts. All right. When you go to do your mastery check, the other thing you need to know is that you should read those cards and don't be afraid to go back and reference your practice to do your mastery check. Read those cards. You're going to need the answers for some of them. All right. You have unlocked your note sheet. You should get that link right now. Make sure you paste it into your notebook in this section that says 6.2. And that is all for now. I hope you have a great time doing this, and I'm around if you need me.